Hey everyone! Welcome to a new episode of Rich and Raw. Get ready to be Esthersized. If you love these mindset shifts, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Let's dive in.
All right, chapter 4. The first principle in the science of getting rich. Thought is the only power which can produce tangible riches from the formless substance. Capitalized formless, capitalized substance.
Thought is the only.
Thought is the only power which can produce tangible riches from the formless substance. The stuff from which all things are made is a substance which thinks, and a thought of form in this substance produces the form. The stuff from which all things are made is a substance which thinks, and a thought of form in this substance produces the form. Original substance moves according to its thoughts. Every form and process you see in nature is the visible expression of a thought in original substance. As the formless stuff thinks of a form, it takes that form. As it thinks of a motion, it makes that motion. That is the way all things were created. We live in a thought world, which is part of a thought universe. The thought of a moving universe extended throughout formless substance, and the thinking stuff, moving according to that thought, took the form of systems of planets and maintains that form.
How could he have known that?
Well,
How could he have known that in 10? That's crazy.
he's conceptualizing truth, right? I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it sounds a lot like the stuff that Steiner talks about around the same time, too.
And Einstein too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's really a science. But I keep thinking about, okay, who is thinking the thoughts to make the form of the earth in the first place? Because if everything is made of form, matter, right? And thought is what created it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even an atheist could argue that. Somebody had to be thinking it, right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people think it's only the material, right? And that everything else is directly a reflect of the biochemical process, the material substance. So I think if you don't conceptualize, if you don't have confidence in your belief that there's a soul and a spirit that exists beyond the physical body, doesn't it make sense that you would also be problematic to accept that there's a thought world that exists independent of your biological, chemical, physical, material body?
Right. I think so.
Because I mean, that extreme is like literally we're just gadgets and gadgets firing on pins.
Right.
But
Right.
then again, your point is like, where did that all come from?
Right. Where did that start? Well, and the argument that this is all an illusion fits with that
Right.
because it's the thought that's real, but we create the form that we perceive from our thought. And Einstein used to say there's there's just space in between everything. There's nothing solid, right? That makes sense too because thought isn't solid, but we form substance, right? With our thought. Or did I say it backwards?
Well, I'm just thinking that, I mean, you basically are saying what he's saying, which is the formless substance. There's still a substance,
Right.
but it doesn't have a physical form.
Right.
The thought of a moving universe extended throughout formless substance, and the thinking stuff, moving according to that thought, took the form of systems of planets and maintains that form.
Okay.
Thinking substance takes the form of its thought and moves according to the thought. Holding the idea of a circling system of suns and worlds, it takes the form of these bodies and moves them as it thinks. Thinking the form of a slow-growing oak tree, it moves accordingly and produces the tree, though centuries may be required to do the work. In creating, the formless seems to move according to the lines of motion it has established. The thought of an oak tree does not cause the instant formation of a full-grown tree, but it does start in motion the forces which will produce the tree along established lines of growth.
Okay. Okay, I'm following that so far. Are you?
I think so. Every thought of form held in thinking substance causes the creation of the form, but always, or at least generally, along lines of growth and action already established. The thought of a house of a certain construction, if it were impressed upon formless substance, might not cause the instant formation of the house, but it would cause the turning of creative energies already working in trade and commerce into such channels as to result in the speedy building of the house. And if there were no existing channels through which the creative energy could work, then the house would be formed directly from primal substance without waiting for the slow processes of the organic and inorganic world. And if there were no existing channels through which the creative energy could work, then the house would be formed directly from primal substance without waiting for the slow processes of the organic and inorganic world. No thought of form can be impressed upon original substance without causing the creation of the form. My eyes are crossing.
Read that again.
No thought of form can be impressed upon original substance without causing the creation of the form.
Wow. So basically, if you think it happens.
Yeah.
No, well, but you have to have a focus.
Yeah, he's saying that's always the effect. The cause is
Yes.
always the thought.
The cause is always the thought, and you can't not have it be created if the thought exists.
So if you're always thinking, how do I win what I want? How do I beat my enemies? You're creating the vehicle with which you then operate in, which is where are your enemies to defeat.
Yes, having enemies to defeat in the first place.
Right.
That's reminds me of what Keith Raniere used to say with what would it be like if you lived in a world without the word war? Remember that? We used to
Yep.
talk about our language actually creates, which is a thought form, the thing that exists. So if you had a world where that word doesn't exist or no other word that meant that, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What kind of world would that be? And that's almost hard for us to even grasp because that thought of that is so much a part of how we think.
But even that question is brilliant because by holding the thought, like, what if that concept didn't exist?
Okay.
Then that creates a space, it holds that there to even be able to mentally extrapolate, well, what else would exist if
Right.
that wasn't the thing,
Right.
right?
Right. That's his brilliance coming out for sure. Okay.
Man is a thinking center and can originate thought. All the forms that man fashions with his hands must first exist in his thought. This is the whole Garden of Eden and the snake, right? The tree of knowledge, she bit of the tree of knowledge, and the idea that human beings are the most powerful being, but we've been misled.
Right. Right.
Which is the Garden of Eden and the creation story.
Yes. Which I have reframed that so many times lately from this book, and there's another book. What are we reading, Megan? Not not the Let It. I think it's Anthony's awareness book. He talks about that too, like what that really meant. Anthony DeMello,
What's the name of it? Awareness?
awareness. Yeah, because you know how they're more primitive people live in a life, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible, right? But they're not even aware of their thoughts that they're creating. So if you can't be aware, or if you're not,
We got to spell that out. Like when you talk about primitive people, oh, that'd be horrible. What does that conjures up? Because I think there's a lot of people like, oh my gosh, primitive. That's when everything was great, and that's the thing to uphold and strive for.
oh, different definition. No, to me,
Right.
primitive is everybody's fighting all the time. people don't have food, circumstances of shelter and hygiene are
People are fighting
terrible.
each other, taking things away from each other, eating each other because they don't
Yeah,
know how to grow food or they don't grow food or
yeah, yeah. Like Old Testament stuff, I guess.
yes. Okay.
Or even like now, I think there's people that live in ways that we look at and go, whoa. Like the resources are there. They're in this horrible housing situation in a neighborhood of plenty. Like you can walk down the street and there's, you know, everything you need, right? So I think that there's an assumption in what he's saying that you are aware that you are thinking. And I don't think everybody's aware of that.
Mm-mm.
I barely realize of what I create, right? Like I see what I create and go, oh my gosh, I that wasn't very mindful of me, right?
Well, if there's a inheritance, right? Like there's a legacy we've inherited from the people before us, and we have like these primitive
Mhm.
impressions, like war is a thing.
Right?
Like we're reading all this early education stuff, like how America came to be and how the colonies were settled and how people handled life, with the kings and queens in old England. And
Mhm.
this idea of like, oh, well, that's just the way human beings are, right? Like that's
Right.
always been the way. It will always be the way. Everyone's going to fight someone else for power until
Oh,
they're
yeah.
usurped, right? So if we inherit that from the other people before us without ever realizing it, that's still a thought that we
Right.
have responsibility for
Right.
sorting out.
Right. And that woman we listened to this morning talked about that 2025 is the end of that era. Like we are completing, those of us that are aware and have done the work to even understand what we're talking about, that era that you have to live out that karma or that indoctrination. You don't have to anymore. Like this is the year that that's all going to shift. That's why it blows my mind we're reading this right now. Because it's like, yay, we're ready. Okay, let's do it. Okay, I want to. I want to live a different life. Good idea.
All the forms that man fashions with his hands must first exist in his thought. He cannot shape a thing until he has thought that thing.
Okay.
And so far, man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. I'm going to back up. Man is a thinking center and can originate thought. All the forms that man fashions with his hands must first exist in his thought. He cannot shape a thing until he has thought that thing. And so far, man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. He has applied manual labor to the world of forms, seeking to change or modify those already existing. So we inherit this legacy from whoever before us did the
Right.
work to create it. We just take it and try to make it
We
different.
build on it. And that's what makes
Well, that's
humans,
the whole might is right too, right?
yeah, but it makes humans different than animals.
Yeah.
Animals don't build a legacy.
Yeah.
Animals can use, a bird can use somebody else's nest, but it's not like that person, that bird before him left the nest so that somebody else could. It was just
Yeah.
an abandoned nest, right? We
Yeah.
actually think ahead of time and abstract. So that's what I was talking about before with primitive humans. I think I didn't finish that thought. It's like if you're not even aware that you're thinking, if you're still in a primitive thought and not a logical thinker, like a kid, think about children. They think they can have whatever they want and the thing doesn't even exist, right? So they're not capable of realizing that they're thinking about something. We're capable of being aware of what we're thinking. And the more aware of what you are thinking, the more you can form a thought that creates what you want. So everything in his book assumes you know that you're not your thought and that you're capable and aware that you can think. And that's kind of big. Maybe that's why nobody knows about the book. Linda did, though. Linda Chung knew about the book.
He has never thought of trying to cause the creation of new forms by impressing his thoughts upon formless substance.
Say that again.
He has never thought of trying to cause the creation of new forms by impressing his thoughts upon formless substance. So far, man has confined his efforts wholly to the work of his hands. He has applied manual labor to the world of forms, seeking to change or modify those already existing.
Kind of what I was talking about. Yeah. Okay,
He
cool.
has never thought of trying to cause the creation of new forms by impressing his thoughts upon formless substance. So he's basically like, even as people, we're still like the birds. We just pick up the nest and go from there.
Right. Right. And it's interesting too, because I feel like my generation, especially, we had that beaten into us. If you don't get this done, if you don't work hard, you are never going to go anywhere. And this new generation, they're like, that's stupid. Right? So there's this whole evolution of the way my generation does the world, Lori's generation, my mom's, right? Even more so with mom is scarcity mindset. We have some abundance, but we think we have to work really hard to get it. There's this whole new way of thinking that this guy way long time ago already knew about, which is that that's not really what's making it happen. We made it happen to actually evolve to the point where we knew we were thinking by doing all the physical work. I think you come to the conclusion and you figure that out. It's like how we're evolving into realizing that you can create stuff. It's not that you don't have to do anything, but it's not the main thing. Before you just do, no thought. Just be the robot in the factory line, right?
And that explains too, I think, why a lot of kids aren't, people complain, well, they don't work like they used to. Well, what are they going to go do? Like some minimum wage flip burgers, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, right? There's like the repetition in it. When you could go to Instagram and create a profile and attract followers, like there's a different existence in that.
Yeah, and the ETs are saying too that a big part of what we need to do is embrace AI, because AI is going to be the upgrade that we need to manifest farther, faster. It's going to be like an extension of us, right? Think about it. It's a thought. We're reproducing in an AI thought. Like every time I put something I write into the chat thing, chat GPT, whatever it's called. Oh my God, how did it know I was thinking that? Right? Well, it doesn't always get everything, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, that's wild, because I was going to forward you this thing I saw earlier. They're talking about that we're at the beginning of the age of synthetic reasoning, and that AI is developing so quickly and so fast. It opens up with the advancement of AI continues at a profound pace in 2025. Keeping up with the announcements is hard. Keeping up with the implications of these announcements is even harder. And he's basically saying that what they're finding out is that the computer system, they don't need modification by outside people. He says everything is kind of emergent. Nothing is hard coded. Anything that you see out there with the reasoning, nothing has been done to say to the model, hey, you should maybe verify your solution. You should backtrack. You should XYZ. No tactic was given to the model. Everything is emergent. Everything is learned through reinforcement learning. This is insanity. So he goes back to say, in the plain English, to translate that from the coding word, the AI developed its own methods of advanced thinking and problem solving. No human programmed it with specific strategies like check your work or try a different approach if stuck. Instead, through reinforcement learning or trial and error, it discovered these strategies on its own. And they're claiming the AI effectively taught itself how to think systematically.
Yeah.
So he's saying basically, we've already programmed AI. Now it's doing the thing we've programmed it, and it's going to now show us how to reason in a way that we haven't been able to conceptualize before.
Which could be a good thing.
It could, right? Well, that's my thought, right? Like it's a tool. It's a powerful tool that we've designed, that we've thought into being.
It's no different than wearing your glasses.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. When a man has a thought form, he takes material from the forms of nature and makes an image of the form which is in his mind. He has so far made little or no effort to cooperate with formless intelligence, to work with the Father. He is not the Father, capital F, with the Father.
Okay.
He has not dreamed that he can do what he seeth the Father doing. Man reshapes and modifies existing forms by manual labor. He has given no attention to the question of whether he may produce things from formless substance by communicating his thoughts to it. So this is 100 years later, right? 100 plus years later with AI, which is kind of what AI is doing.
Right. Say it again, Megan.
Man reshapes and modifies existing forms by manual labor. He has
Okay.
given no attention to the question of whether he may produce things from formless substance by communicating his thoughts to it.
Which is
We,
what AI is, totally.
we propose to prove that he may do so, to prove that any man or woman may do so, and to show how. As our first step, we must lay down 3 fundamental propositions.
Okay, I'm excited about this.
Okay, we got like
I know.
2 pages left.
Okay, we can do it.
First, we assert that there is one original formless stuff or substance from which all things are made.
Okay.
All the seemingly many elements are but different presentations of one element. All the many forms found in organic and inorganic nature are but different shapes made from the same stuff. And this stuff is thinking stuff. A thought held in it produces the form of the thought. Thought in thinking substance produces shapes. Man is a thinking center capable of original thought. If man can communicate his thought to original thinking substance, he can cause the creation or formation of the thing he thinks about.
Ayn Rand said the same thing in Atlas Shrugged and in The Fountainhead. She talks about like the most, people love landscapes and love nature and love all this other stuff. She goes, no, no, no. What's the most beautiful thing on the planet is the creation of man. Look at the skyscrapers. That place we had a coffee in
Charlotte?
Charlotte. I was thinking that when we saw those trees inside the building, the terrarium, like somebody thought that up. Somebody decided where each tree was going to go, where the seats were that we sat on, and that they would have a high back on them so that we could sit there and lean back and look up and see this vaulted, beautiful, sunlit ceiling. That's incredible.
Well, what I'm reading when I go through those lines specifically is I think like is that different? The male way is its own way of being.
What do you mean?
Well, this to me, like I think this was written by a man and he's talking about a male perspective. And
Okay.
as women outside of that, would it be a different process for us?
Oh, wow. We won't
You know,
know.
because Ayn Rand's amazing, but she's also very Eastern European, which I find to be a more male dominant
Totally.
viewing and
Freaking Russian almost.
exactly. She is, right?
Oh, she was
Abstract
Russian,
the
yeah.
word. Right?
I couldn't remember. But
So I just think this thinking center, it's almost like, a lot of people will say that man is just trying to create the capacity to produce life the way women do. Like all of the AI, all of the robots is just that man really wants to be able to do it themselves without having to be dependent on women for that.
back to Adam and Eve.
Right?
I don't
Just
claim to get that totally, just so you know.
yeah, well, I'm just putting it's
I'm reading this book on fasting, and Adam and Eve's in that too. Like why it's important to fast and how the tree of knowledge has everything to do why we eat too much. And it's crazy. Crazy. Like basically when even for 24 hours if you don't eat, just drink water, how it opens you up
the
to
clarity.
of what your assignment is. And he says if you're not clear about what abundant thing you want to create and what your next assignment is, stop eating. So guess what I did? I stopped eating.
If you want to clear the chutes, then stop loading them up.
Yeah. I know. I was like, wow, okay, that's simple. And basically his argument is, and I'll let you get back to reading, that if you are that hungry, maybe what you're hungry for is only to find purpose. And all the other ways that you nourish that empty space is a futile distraction to keep you from really knowing your next step of who you are, what you want to be, where we're going.
I absolutely think that encompasses all the addictions in our culture.
100%. 100%. you don't see a wise, peaceful, joyful human that has addictions. It's just not, they don't go together. It's a really good point. Damn.
There's a reason why we equate addictions with the mental health.
Yes. And it's a reason why we don't feel good when we indulge in our addictions. Thank God. I mean,
Yeah.
if they all felt good, I think we'd be on a different planet.
To summarize this, there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made and which, in its original state, permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. Like that just to me feels like a man's writing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know that a woman would ever put that string of words together.
It's kind of
my check.
Bleh, I mean, it's like not, I certainly would like to word it differently. And I think that's why I like that we talk about it each time, because it kind of doesn't really sink into my female body without the commentary of us cross-referencing our experience and our feelings and our emotions into what he's thinking.
The matrix of it.
Yeah. It's totally matrix. Yeah.
A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. Man can form things in his thought and, by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. That's all italics. So I'm going to read it again.
Okay.
There is a thinking stuff from which all things are made and which, in its original state, permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. Man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created.
So basically, we have all this substance. We live like we're in a particle world. You ever experience particle world? Or like if you get in a car accident, everything slows down and you feel like the veil that we're in sort of, and it kind of doesn't fit with how we experience our day-to-day existence, right? So the way I get what he's saying is there's all this substance that we're working with, and we're not even aware of how much our thoughts actually create the forms within the substance. Kind of like if I have mud and I get the water squeezed out of it and focus in on my vision enough, I can form clay into a shape of what I vision. So literally, we are within the space, we're part of it, and we're trying to take all this substance and form stuff into it. And in fact, we are on a daily basis. This lamp is a lamp because I think of it as a lamp, and so does everybody else. And if we didn't,
creative process.
Yeah.
And even when you start talking about the clay, because I think of this as like basic biology. That's my metaphor I think of. It's like the sperm and the egg, all of that.
Right.
You're like forming it with the clay, right? That's the origin story of human beings. Like we were formed from the mud of the earth.
Yes, we are from the earth. Yeah. We're water and mud.
Basically. And then to breathe the light, breathe the life into it.
That's incredible.
Right?
Okay,
so whatever, say it again.
Okay, I was just saying, okay, I get that. I get what he just said, I think.
It's like whatever frame that you're in, your intention is what's going to then be affected in that form that you then create in the material world.
Right. Which is why when you want something to change in the world, right? That let's say your kids, for example, Lori and I've been talking about this. We have the one thing is like, I don't like how this looks. I want it to change. And then you have how you feel about the humans involved. You got to keep them separate. Otherwise, you create a dynamic between the humans that's not even related to changing the substance that they experience. So let me explain what I'm saying. If I'm emotionally attached to somebody being a certain way, it actually thwarts my ability to help them see how they can create a form that's separate. Because now I'm forming them to have that limitation because I'm thinking of them as being the limited thing. Right? And if they're not aware that their thoughts and what they're doing is creating that situation, the only way you can help them change that is to change how you perceive them to be capable of changing it.
Which is parenting.
Totally.
That's the struggle of parenting.
Oh my God, that's been the hardest thing for me. I mean, clearly I got through some of it, but I still like you want your children to have this life, and instead of thinking, oh, I'm creating a child through my thought that has the life I don't want, I can only change it and their effects by changing the way I perceive them to be capable. And that's just part of it. They still have to change. They have to be aware of their own thoughts too, because it's a co-creation.
But that's a level, I think, of evolution and a human awareness that's been developing.
Yeah, totally. That's recent.
Yeah.
It's also why I don't really like counselors.
Yeah.
Because if you label somebody a certain limitation and you put a name on it, you're sticking that human being through your thought form into a substance that keeps it impossible for them to change.
And there's a violence in that as well.
Totally. Totally. It's bad. But if you're co-participating with somebody that wants to think of it that way and they don't want to be responsible for their own thought form, maybe it's better. I mean, I could argue either way. But anytime I've gone to a shrink, which I have a couple times, I ended up arguing with them about what they thought I needed to do that I knew was in a management of my effects instead of recognizing that, no, I want to change how I'm causing those effects. I don't want some sort of pill or something to help me manage how badly I feel about my effects, because that just gets me used to them and also changes my thought of myself, creates a whole identity of my limitation, and now I can't change it because I don't think it's possible.
And it perpetuates your belief that there's a dependency.
I'm depressed after all.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
and I know that's really controversial the way people say that, but I had one what I considered very aware person tell me once that depression is a soul's refusal to allow you to be okay with not expanding who you want to be.
Oh, spot on.
And anytime I get depressed, I'm like, okay. Oh shit. Okay. Like, like where do I not want to expand right now? You know? Where am I so afraid that I'm not even aware I'm afraid, that I don't want to expand the thing, that I would rather suppress myself, regress into this little cave, and then label myself as depressed so that I don't have to do the work to get the shit going and get out of there. Right? Fear is only created bigger when you don't face it. And there's been times I didn't want to face it, and being depressed felt better. It didn't last very long for my personality anyways. I suppose if it feels really yummy to you, you might stick with it. Kind of like drinking,
Well, sometimes you got to get really
No.
muddy and mired in it in order to see a different way.
Right. Or be around a bunch of super joyful people that you just want to barf because you're like, what's the matter with you? How come you're so happy? You know what I mean? It's like if you don't know anything different, you would never think you weren't creating a victim of yourself in order to feel safer, I guess. But it's amazing how much, though, what he's saying, this very scientific, triggers all these things in my thinking and in our thinking, right? In the world that we feel victim to because we're not even aware how we create stuff. Right?
Starting with a fundamental press up of you have to focus on what you want and allow it to be okay to want it.
Yeah. Last chapter. Like really figure out what you want and stay focused on it.
It may be asked if I can prove these statements, and without going into details, I answer that I can do so both by logic and experience.
Awesome.
Reasoning back from the phenomena of form and thought, I come to one original thinking substance. And reasoning forward from this thinking substance, I come to man's power to cause the formation of the thing he thinks about. I come to man's power to cause the formation of the thing he thinks about. And by experiment, I find the reasoning true, and this is my strongest proof. If one man who reads this book gets rich by doing what it tells him to do, that is evidence in support of my claim. But if every man who does what it tells him to do gets rich, this is positive proof until someone goes through the process and fails. The theory is true until the process fails, and this process will not fail. For every man who does exactly what this book tells him to do will get rich. I have said that men get rich by doing things in a certain way, and in order to do so, men must become able to think in a certain way. A man's way of doing things is the direct result of the way he thinks about things. To do things in a way you want to do them, you will have to acquire the ability to think the way you want to think. This is the first step toward getting rich. To think what you want to think is to think truth, regardless of appearances. Every man has the natural and inherent power to think what he wants to think, but it requires far more effort to do so than it does to think the thoughts which are suggested by appearances. To think according to appearance is easy. To think truth, regardless of appearances, is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work man is called upon to perform.
Wow.
Every man has the natural and inherent power to think what he wants to think, but it requires far more effort to do so than it does to think the thoughts which are suggested by appearances. To think according to appearance is easy. To think truth regardless of appearances is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work man is called upon to perform.
I would agree with that. So there it is. That's the work. That's the awareness part.
There
Like
is no
really owning
yeah.
you. Go ahead. There's no what?
There is no labor from which most people shrink as they do from that of sustained and consecutive thought. It is the hardest work in the world.
In the world of total ADD. Give it to me now. This is what we're dealing with.
Especially true when truth is contrary to appearances.
Especially true.
That's true.
Uh-huh.
Every appearance in the visible world tends to produce a corresponding form in the mind which observes it, and this can only be prevented by holding the thought of the truth. To look upon the appearance of disease will produce the form of disease in your own mind and ultimately in your body, unless you hold the thought of the truth, which is that there is no disease. It is only an appearance, and the reality is health.
100%.
To look upon the appearances of poverty will produce corresponding forms in your own mind, unless you hold to the truth that there is no poverty, there is only abundance. To think health when surrounded by the appearances of disease, or to think riches when in the midst of appearances of poverty, requires power. But he who acquires this power becomes a mastermind. He can conquer fate. He can have what he wants. I think I heard that this guy was the original source of the term mastermind, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
Like mastermind groups.
Right. And wasn't Think and Grow Rich written after his?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of the guys that inspired that, or the guy who inspired that one.
Right.
This power can only be acquired by getting hold of the basic fact which is behind all appearances. That fact is that there is one thinking substance from which and by which all things are made. Then we must grasp the truth that every thought held in this substance becomes a form, and that man can so impress his thoughts upon it as to cause them to take form and become visible things. When we realize this, we lose all doubt and fear, for we know that we can create what we want to create. We can get what we want to have, and we can become what we want to be. As a first step toward getting rich, you must believe the three fundamental statements given previously in this chapter, and in order to emphasize them, I repeat them here.
Wonderful.
1, there is a thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which, in its original state, permeates, penetrates, and fills the interspaces of the universe. 2. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. And 3, man can form things in his thought and, by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created.
They seem like all the same thing.
They do. Fundamental statements.
One is what you create it with, that you can create it, and then it's created.
So prior, present, then,
Mm-hmm.
before, now, and
Mm-hmm.
you must lay aside all other concepts of the universe than this monistic one. And you must dwell upon this until it is fixed in your mind and has become your habitual thought. Read these creed statements over and over again. Fix every word upon your memory and meditate upon them until you firmly believe what they say. If a doubt comes to you, cast it aside as a sin. Do not listen to arguments against this idea. Do not go to churches or lectures where a contrary concept of things is taught or preached. Do not read magazines or books which teach a different idea. If you get mixed up in your faith, all your efforts will be in vain. Do not ask why these things are true, nor speculate as to how they can be true. Simply take them on trust. The science of getting rich begins with the absolute acceptance of this faith.
You know what this reminds me of? How can you decide how to feel emotionally if you're not even aware of how you cause your own emotions?
What?
How can I decide how I want to feel?
Yeah.
If I'm not even aware that I cause my own emotions.
Yeah.
Like
Which is
I create my emotions. And that we got that in the ESP, Executive Success Programs we took. We figured it out that you can be at cause, which is a state of understanding that somewhere in this physical environment, I have a thought mixed with a soma that put together creates an emotion. Conscious or not conscious, I'm still creating it. I create every emotion that I have, even if I'm not aware of how I create it.
and that's a form of abundance. That's an assumption of abundance.
Exactly, 100%. So what he's saying with regard to thought is that all thought comes from that universal law that there's substance that we can think with. That's what I'm getting. And then the second law that has to do with the science of certain way of abundance is I have the capacity in my thought to create form in that substance. That's rule number 2, right? And rule number 3 is if I accept that fully and choose to be aware of it, I will create and it will be created in the world. Right? Same with emotions. You're going to have an emotion whether you're driving the boat or not. There's no one that doesn't have any feelings. You may not be aware of how you feel, but you still have feelings. The feeling of not being aware is a feeling, even. Anyways, does that make sense? This is the longest one yet. Oh, sorry, everybody.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's also the very first principle, so it's relevant.
Okay, good. And that was chapter 4.
That was chapter 4. Yeah.
Okay. I'm very excited about this, Megan. And if well, that chapter was kind of longer, but I think it was because it was so deep. We'll just let it go. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.